just in case if folks join us in a bit. And then if not, we'll definitely record and send this over. But for everyone that's joining in right now, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat real quick. Just put in like where you're calling from and maybe just like the 6-word mission that we always do. I think that always helps to give our guests a little sense of what work you're doing. So just like put in your 6-word mission statement for your organization. And I'll kick us off. So thank you so much for joining us for this June convening. I know we didn't have one in May, so we're excited to kind of connect back in again and reconnect with a lot of you. It's going to be a really fun conversation. I've been looking forward to this for many months now. So this is going to be quite fun. And the format's going to be fairly similar to our past convening. So we'll start with a few early questions about the work that Aru is doing with VIAMO and with the Humanitarian Innovation Fund. And then we'll try to open up for more broad questions and for any general questions that you all have as well. And in kind of the spirit of introducing Aru and getting a more formal introduction, I'll go ahead and share a little bit about the work that she's doing. So Aru is the country manager for VIAMO in Nepal. But prior to joining VIAMO, she worked at the United Nations in various regional and country capacities for 12 years, and at the World Vision International for 4 years, setting up the Innovation Lab in Nepal while working across Asia Pacific, North and Latin America. Aru has been engaged with the Humanitarian Innovation Fund since 2016 and is currently on the advisory group to support the process of learning, failing, and growing and delivering the humanitarian sector's mission. So it's just a pleasure to have you with us. And thank you once again for making time to speak with our group today. Thank you once again, Aru, for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. Like Avi said, like we've been trying to figure this out for a while, and I'm glad it's landed on this day.
Yeah, and just a special mention, and I know I didn't ask for permission, but it's her birthday today. So if everyone can just drop in a little birthday message, I think that would be special. And we're just honored that you're making time this morning to be with us too.
Absolutely.
I was gonna try to get us to coordinatedly sing, but that never ends well in Zoom. So we'll try to avoid that embarrassment for
it's the thought that counts. It's really the thought that counts.
we're all singing with our microphones muted, but let me get started and maybe ask the first question for this conversation. In many ways, the work that you've been doing, whether at the United Nations, whether at World Vision, and now at VIAMO, it seems like the common thread has been the word innovation. And I wanted to start by asking a general question of what is your understanding of the word innovation?
So I've always been very curious about things. I grew up on military bases because both my parents were in the military, grew up moving a bunch of places, moving schools a bunch of times. So always having to kind of like adapt growing up, be it like making friends, be it like, adjusting to a new environment. And so to me, innovation has kind of like come from my childhood behavior traits, I guess, in terms of like trying to make the next thing better, or trying to make the next day better, or trying to kind of like figure out, okay, what is the solution for this piece? Like this piece could, for like the 10-year-old in me could be like, oh, I'm nervous to go to this new school because I have friends that I left in like the last 3 schools, and like, we've just moved. Like, how do I make this day better for me, but also for these people who are going to meet me for the first time? So I think it really comes from that. It stems, I guess, from all of that in terms of like just trying to make things better. Like, I know people have very different and technical, and they come from technical schools of thought, but like for me, it's always been like, okay, how do you find a solution for a problem? How do you make something just bigger and better and bolder? But you test it as you go along, and you shed the pieces that don't work for you, right? And it could be a thing, it could be a process, it could be just your mood in life, let's say. So yeah, that's kind of it.
No, it's super helpful. And I had a quick follow up on that, because making things better, and I don't know if that would be the right kind of words to describe what you were sharing, but in many ways, when in today's world, when we think of making things better, oftentimes people think of starting up, right? Starting a venture, social entrepreneurship. That's the big kind of hot thing right now. And it's been around for a while. And you took a different path in many ways. And so what you've done and what I can see in the last, 2 decades or more is going into institutions, going into organizations, whether it's the United Nations, a big, scary kind of institution in the world, or World Vision, which has obviously existed for a while. What inspired you to work within these institutions as, if I may say, an entrepreneur, rather than kind of choosing this path of the entrepreneurship, which oftentimes is the more promoted language or literature that we read? What was that kind of inspiration for you?
I think I'm a good enabler. I think like you said, I've been doing this for a little over 20 years now. And so with my experience, with connections I've made, so the social capital I've gained, in the sectors and the countries I've worked in, one of the reasons I wanted to kind of enter into existing institutions instead of making my own piece, for the lack of a better term, was to be able to kind of interject myself into these big platforms to also kind of enable that ground for younger people, for other people to kind of come in and to kind of create a bridge, if you will, of young people who would come join the team, who would then be able to interact with some of the team members who might have been there for a longer period of time, who might have kind of done things more traditionally. So I've always, how do I put this? I like asking questions. I like challenging, but ethically and meaningfully. So, and also not to challenge to put somebody in a difficult spot, but to challenge to make sure that I can also kind of support them along that journey, but also to get them to question their own work in a way of, again, how do I make this better? How do I do this differently that makes more of an impact, right? So I felt that piece has, I guess, in a way been missing. And I kind of saw myself as a bit of a professional unicorn where I was able to interject and just kind of pave the way. And I've seen a lot of the young people and the young teams that I've worked with grow on to really, kind of really effective roles in other groups and organizations. And it gives me a sense of pride as well, to be okay, there are country directors, there are regional directors now that I used to work with, and that I used to mentor. And I'm kind of I'm very glad that I was able to give them that space to just grow and test even their own capacities out. Very recently, I actually had a coffee with somebody who used to intern for me 20 years ago. Had not realized he came back to Nepal, and he is the country director for an international NGO there. And he was very specific about remembering certain tasks that, we'd worked on together. Again, this is 20 years ago, over the time, I had many interns, and it was a very endearing experience where I was just wow, that made such an impact on him. He was I never would have gone into this if you hadn't created that safe space for me, to even fail. And I think I pride myself in really speaking about failure within my teams and protecting them from the bureaucracy of these large organizations when it comes to the failure or lack of being able to embrace it, so yeah. I know that was a really long answer to your question, but I thought I'd kind of explain myself.
No, I loved it. And I find it very inspiring, on a number of levels, because, well, first of all of the people that are here, with this convening, are probably people who love mentorship, right? Because they're early stage and they're here and they may be seeing this as even sort of a form of mentorship, that they see the convenings as a way to just sort of be in a space to have an informal, not making a pitch, not telling my confessional story thing, right? So I just wanted to say that I'm really, really grateful for that relevancy. Also, just remind everybody who's here, Dina and and Jimmy and all of you there, write in the chat if you want to, just where you're calling from and what sort of sector, what's on your mind, right? What you're interested in, just so that we have some context there. But to follow up on what Abhi was saying, in all the years then that you've been mentoring and bringing your brilliance and your passion and your kindness to, emerging social change makers and innovation at the humanitarian level, would you say that the challenges facing social change makers, social entrepreneurs 20 years ago are still the same challenges? Like when someone comes to you today and they're like, oh my gosh, here's what I'm concerned about, here's what I need help with. What have you noticed over time? Have the challenges exacerbated? Have they changed? Are they pretty much the same?
I would say for the most part, when I first started in this sector, the big question, or the challenge really was, okay, this is the problem. How do I work towards fixing it? Right? How do I work towards a solution? And whereas pieces around the sector overall, donors, bilaterals, implementers, both international and national, and even partners on the ground, now I feel that there has been a greater adoption of innovation, of digital, of technology, of frontier tech, no matter what you want to call it, right? Mm-hmm. There's also been a scrutiny around it in terms of the bureaucracy and the compliance pieces when it comes to the regulatory environment. And this differs country to country, region to region, right? So I feel that now, while there is still that raw, I see a problem, I want to fix it, there's also that, but I need to deal with all of this bureaucracy to register my idea, or these pieces I want to code, or these pieces I want to create, so that at the end of the day, as I'm testing, as I'm kind of also implementing this or piloting it or prototyping it, whatever you want to be doing, A, you're not doing harm. B, you're also making sure to meet compliance. C, you have to be very careful about is it actually, are you just taking something from somebody else's idea? Is it, are you stealing an idea without knowing it, right? So I feel that there's all of this with the internet, with information being so out there, with a lot of people having a lot more open conversations about these things. I feel there's this whole institutionalization of problem solving, for the lack of a better term right now, that has become a monster. And I'm not sure that most countries have enough of, provide enough information to social change makers, social entrepreneurs, to be able to navigate that while they're still working on their idea, while they're still working on fixing things, or creating that big impactful change that they want to be able to create. So I feel that kind of also demotivates them. Access to innovation funds, for example, not a lot of it is available to the global south. Not a lot of it is available to people or groups or of color or minorities. They don't even know what's out there. This is one of the main conversations that, I've brought up at the HIF, the Humanitarian Innovation Fund. These are big conversations that we're starting to have with big donors as well, being why are proposal briefs just always top to bottom, why? And there's now, I think, more of a intention and effort around really being able to generate the needs and challenges from the ground and then inform the briefs that then are released. But I think over the last good, I'd say 12 to 15 years, it's really been a learning by doing process. There still isn't enough information or flexibility out there for social change makers to also feel that they can do the work that they're focused on while figuring out that institutionalization piece. But I think we're getting better, and still a long way to go.
Yeah. Oh, you just said that so well. That was so articulated so clearly, and really resonates with me and Abhi and Little Big Fund, because, this idea of this, wait a minute, I need to drive my motorcycle and deliver these antivirals today, and I can't finish writing 500 words to say that I'm driving my motorcycle to deliver, right? And so that the way you've explained that in terms of this institutionalization of problem solving is overwhelming, and it really is demotivating, and it is a barrier. And I wonder if you should write an article about it, because you talked about it so clearly. But I wonder too, what are your thoughts about like what's driving that? Is that M&E? Is that because donors in the philanthropic space are just so risk averse? Like if it's a big donor and they have millions of dollars that they're going to give away, why can't they say, well, we'll speculate, right, with 1%? And not have all the paperwork and stuff, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that sort of idea?
I think it's both of the things you said, like, donors and I would say big governments, or like, global North governments kind of being risk averse, but also the M&E piece. I don't know that there have been enough thought put in towards including performance metrics around failure or even reporting failure. I know people or some organizations loosely like to do what they call like fail fests, or like, similar modalities where they celebrate failure. But in a report to USAID, in a report to FCDO or ECHO, you rarely see a piece, even annexed, where it's like, oh, this is what we promised we'd do in our proposal, but we fell flat on our faces because of XYZ. It's always best practices or lessons learned, like, and I'm like, I mean, yeah, I get it, but like, could we just also say, this just didn't work, so this is how we pivoted based on what we realized, right? Because when you do a baseline, when you do a proposal, they're intentional. When you do a baseline, it's kind of like so scattered that you might not be able to align your baseline findings to what the proposal had intended, right? So, but then the proposal has been approved. And rarely do we push back on what we have proposed. We just move ahead. We just go ahead because, like, I don't know if it's like an education thing, or we're just not programmed to accept that what we've proposed or what we want to do is wrong or not necessary. And we just didn't know what we didn't know back then when we were writing it with all good intentions. Or the structure, the program framework or the M&E structure just does not absorb well enough failure, and it's to say, like, for example, like when I was working at the innovation lab, we always used to ask for what we called unrestricted funding, because we wanted to report back on failure. We wanted to basically be like, our job is to give seed grants to individuals or groups who have great ideas for humanitarian response. But once those ideas get to prototyping or prototyping phase, they might not work. They might not be relevant. They might not be necessary. And we don't want them to move further just for the sake of moving further. We want to be able to give you a report on failure, either in terms of, we completely fell on our faces and we're going to stop right here, or we fell on our faces, but this is what we discovered. These are the pieces that we've changed. This is how we pivoted, and this is what we've re-prototyped or retested or repiloted, whatever. And it can go a couple of different ways, right? But I feel like to also kind of come back to Abhi's like first question, like, words around frontier tech, digital tech innovation have been kind of like scattered in program briefs and proposals as like this shiny thing that I'm not sure that the enablement of it in the kind of like, it hasn't really been thought out properly, like in the implementation piece, right? We don't really innovate as well as we should, let's just say.
Yeah, and it's very much, I think, as I just want to kind of second what Gail was saying, very much aligns with a lot of the frustration we've seen in the early stages of Little Big Fund, because simple example, transferring funds. So we provide micro grants to social impact leaders, and not everyone will have a registered bank account or even a registered organization. There are countries where that's not even legally possible. In some ways, you have to go through the government bureaucracy. and yet what they're doing is important today. Like it has to be done right now. And so rather than trying to say, okay, let's like trace it back to how we can make it happen, because oftentimes you hit like 10 roadblocks and then everyone's just frustrated and not much happens. We've had to kind of think on the feet. And one of the things we do is we transfer grants to mobile money, for example. And, you know, we transfer it to the person who's going to implement it, and they're going to submit a report to us about like what worked well, what didn't go well. And more importantly, when something doesn't go well, how can we like unpack that further, and how can we learn from that, and maybe look at, you know, innovating in that continuous cycle that I think you were talking about earlier. So very much kind of connects with that. I did want to kind of unpack the failure piece though, because you mentioned your work with the Innovation Fund, the Innovation Lab, and in many ways, this Innovation Lab was part of this World Vision structure organization, if I'm not wrong. And and so you're reporting to a structure that's fairly bureaucratic, I imagine. Are there like when we say we have to communicate failure, I'm always curious, what's the best strategy? Like, how do you go about actually communicating it in a way that you can actually inspire them to continue working, especially in a bureaucratic system where there is no appetite for failure at all? What are some strategies that you've used and suggestions for folks to like communicate better their failures?
Sure. So just to kind of give you a bit of background, the Innovation Lab started at the end of 2015, when Nepal had that big earthquake. So World Vision is one of the largest humanitarian agencies in the world. And a huge chunk of the funds that they raise globally goes into fragile context or goes into emergency response. And so that's one of their largest technical divisions. And so when the 2015 earthquake happened in Nepal, there was kind of a conversation that started in World Vision, well, basically amongst like, you know, like-minded INGOs around how can we best like implement solutions or find solutions to implement within a emergency response context, like, you know, and not like always having to reinvent the wheel, and for it to already be pre-positioned or prepared, like, you know, beforehand, and for it just to be implemented as response. And so World Vision started off the Innovation Lab. We were based in Nepal, but we had more of kind of like a global mandate to provide technical support, strategic advice. And so one of the reasons I was based in DC back then was also we were doing a lot of projects with USAID Innovation Lab and the World Bank here in Latin America. One of the key processes or kind of like tips to report back on failure with World Vision, what really worked was participation, getting everybody involved in the problem identification, the challenge statement, what the options around the solutions could be. So you're really having like a user-centric or a stakeholder-centric or a human-centric, it depends what word you want to put together, but like, you know, kind of like a stakeholder, human, user-centric approach towards even implementing that entire process, right? So getting the strategy and innovation office involved in saying, oh, these are the problems that have been identified, getting like the various thematic sectors. So if it's an education related project or a WASH related project, then we'd pull in those sectoral experts in the region, country office, to just let them know, just keep them in the know. So maybe send out like an email blast or so, like involve them in like, you know, workshops or like just design sessions, whiteboarding sessions. So letting them know about the process and making them also feel that, you know, this is something that they can participate in, contribute in, and ultimately even use as a solution to implement or test out themselves, right? And then once they're aware of, you know, kind of like the various processes and the various like, you know, pivots you take or the individual or the group takes, then I feel that like, because they feel a part of the process, there's a lot more acceptance in also understanding why or how it failed, and not just thinking, oh, but I gave you all of this money, like how can you not have done what you promised to have done, right? Like, you know, so I feel it's just it's more a matter of like really being open and transparent about what you're doing. Like none of these things are secrets, to be honest. You know, we want to be able to make sure that all of these solutions, specifically around like humanitarian programming are open source and are used by, as many actors as possible. One of the key kind of anchors of the lab was just to make sure that there was a social enterprise model to all of them so that they were sustainable in terms of like funding beyond even like whatever XYZ grant had been received, right? So there was always an intention around making sure that, there was like the shrewdness of the private sector, but at the same time, the ethics of, let's say, the NGO sector. And like, that kind of mesh seemed to work ideally in terms of making sure that your heart was in the right place, but you still were able to kind of like, take this forward and not just rely on development funding.
Thank you so much for, I love that. Especially, I think like the building ownership part of it, I think is something that, especially I think in a funder-fundee relationship, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, I think there's this like silo under which like funders will be operating, and then like the fundees generally operate in this other silo. And perhaps I think what you rightly said, like that human-centric oftentimes will not involve a funder in the conversation, or any of the parties, like the reporting parties are not necessarily involved. And I love the idea of like getting them engaged, whether it's in the whiteboarding process, whether it's in the very beginning, right? Getting them really involved in some of the conversation is, that's a great advice. Thanks for sharing. Gail, do you want to ask the next one?
Yeah, oh my gosh, so many things come up. I think I have some questions in mind, and then no, I want to ask all these other questions because of what she's saying and how inspiring she's. Can we switch a little bit and talk maybe more specifically about Viamo? Am I saying that
Sure.
correctly?
Yeah.
Because I'm very curious about, digital learning, digital sending of money, mobile technologies and coding and all of that. And so there have been times when there have been little big fun believers whose ideas are to use to create a brand new digital platform that then that becomes their social enterprise. Like, so for example, using phones and community members to walk around in a village or in a town or a community and take pictures and report on damage to roads. Right? So they're collecting data, super great. Then that goes to a central place, and then they use that to analyze it. And then they go to the Ministry of Streets or whatever, transportation, and they say, here's 10,000 potholes. I'm just exaggerating, right? But what they ask for in their grants in order to get this done is somebody to do coding, right? To create the platform. So what kind of ideas do you have for streamlining that so that doesn't become one of these, institutionalized, huge bureaucratic, metaphorical pothole for them to create? Because I'm not sure I would know how to analyze a request that way very well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll try to answer it, and then maybe you can give me any follow-up questions, like,
Okay.
So I feel that, we're like, I can't remember, I think one of you had earlier said that people are now always trying to create things. They're always trying to like, do the next best thing, which is great. Don't get me wrong. And I love the enthusiasm, right? But I feel collectively, we don't do enough ecosystem scanning, and while, yes, taking your mobile phone and taking pictures is one of the solutions to be able to collect data visually, you wouldn't necessarily always have to then kind of code a new repository to like, store that. You could, let's say, use, for the lack of a better idea right now, Google Photos, maybe kind of like pull the data on Google Data Studio and kind of like visualize the data that you have to then show your evidence base or make your case, right? So these are existing platforms that one could just have access to immediately through G Suite. So I feel that one of the things that I think young people, especially young innovators, should definitely do is figure out like how best to use existing platforms, existing solutions, that they can just plug in their piece and take advantage of that wider platform, right? Because it also then allows you to share with other users and learn, like, what is out there. But then the other piece also is it avoids then you from having to invest in maintaining that platform, because a huge part of what I think tech innovators don't probably think about immediately, or even donors don't maybe immediately see, is putting the next shiny big thing is great, right? Like, I mean, it's super fun to do. Oh my God, the excitement when you launch that piece. But like the debugging, the technical team you need around it, the servers that you need to run off, the various nodes, like all of the back end, both technical, both machine and human, that is intense. Like, that's very like time and resource intense, right? And I don't know a lot of entities that are able to kind of fund that. Like, it takes a huge commitment. So we have obviously like the Viamo platform. But what we do is when we enter into set up a new country office, we make sure that we work with the existing mobile network operator, and we don't like set up a separate platform itself. Like, so we then plug in the mobile network operator's structure to our platform on the cloud. And that way it's centralized. But a lot of what we also do is we make sure that we're able to plug into various solutions that exist, instead of always creating the next new feature that is unique to us. Sometimes you have to, but then we're also now at the stage, a company where we're across 40 countries. So there are some features that are very unique to our platform that our backend teams work on. But for the most part, like, we really like to do to make sure that we're using existing solutions and plugging that into our platform as well.
That's great. That's a great answer. And if you ever have suggestions for some, articles or some reading that we could share with, our network about that thinking, or about what the existing resources are, then we could direct them. Because at the same time, some of the asks are because they want to have, because of employment for other people, right? That they're thinking, oh, I'm going to ask for this grant and I'm going to start this program. And my buddy over here who just got out of university wants to do something in tech. So there also is an intention of wanting to, share that way. But at the same time, I would think it'd be helpful to us just to know something about what you said. We could say, and also, did you know that in Tanzania, there is XYZ, and collaboration is a wonderful way to go. And sometimes small grants could be given in a collaborative nature too, right? If it's used with like a certain partnership. So thank you so much for your expertise on that.
Yeah, I think a quick analogy I'd use is like, sometimes it's like buying a new shiny car, right? But we don't think about like having to fuel it, having to do like the servicing, the maintenance and everything for years on, right? And paying the taxes or paying your license fees and all of those things. And those are like hidden costs that aren't always, they're there, but aren't always evident. So you might have like, the latest Tesla or whatever, but like everything behind it, if you don't already kind of have the investments for that or the resources for that, then there's no use of the driver. The driver then becomes the weakest link. And you have this shiny new Tesla in your garage, and then what, So I
can't plug it in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't even plug, you can't plug it in because where's your power source? Like all of those things. So I think it's really a matter of like figuring out, okay, what makes the most sense to buy that shiny new Tesla and not be able to fund all of the resources down the line, or to actually start up a ride sharing, a car sharing service, like with existing maybe more, cheaper or not so shiny looking vehicles or
Right.
two-wheelers or four-wheelers. Like, that's how some of the services that we use around the world have started, right? I mean, they're
Right.
banking in on that. So I think it's really a matter of, I guess, coming out of the box, your sandbox in your mind, and like really trying to figure out, okay, what's feasible, what's impactful, what's sustainable, and what can be localized. And these 4 questions really, you need to like look at your ecosystem, like, your geographical location, and really hone in on who are you trying to solve this for? And, will they invest in your idea as stakeholders, as investors? Is this relevant to them, right? Because good intentions are not enough.
Right. So well said. So well said. Abhi, you want to, what do you want to do next? I'm just
I know,
singing
I feel
along
like,
because it's so enjoyable.
yeah, we can, Gail and I could, I think, go on for a couple more hours with some of our questions. I think at some point, I think just learning more about Viamo might be interesting for folks in this call as well. I imagine a lot of the organizations or the institutions that people are building might actually learn a ton from it and potentially work together. I think that would be cool too. And I'll definitely like circle back the website for sure, but I did want to make space for anyone to ask questions. So really anyone, if you want to ask a question, if you're not able to turn on your microphone, feel free to just put it in the chat and we can read it out. Or if you want to just like come off mute and ask a question, there's some space. So if anyone has any questions here. I'll go with the question. I did have one more question. So I'll like squeeze that in as people kind of think about theirs. When I was researching some of the projects and the case studies of Viamo's work, and I think Gail started off in a good path to like understand a bit more. There was one case study that was actually quite interesting, and I wanted you to like, if possible, share. I know you mentioned a little bit about the work that you do, but really kind of going into specific. This was one that I think was focused around like WASH project in Nepal, where Viamo's platform was being used to kind of create a knowledge transfer system. This might not be the most recent case studies, but I wanted to kind of ask you to like talk to us about one of the more recent ones that you've like been involved in, where you've seen digital technology reduce some of these gaps, whether it's in a knowledge level, or I know in some cases you're also doing market access in rural communities. And so I wanted to kind of hear your experience, especially in the more recent times with a case study.
Okay, give me a second. Okay, so what we've started, like we've really tried to kind of like adapt. So just like the quick introduction to Viamo is we do a lot of data collection, information sharing around social behavior change campaigns, and do digital strategies. And all of our deployments are through mobile phones. So we send out surveys. These can be both interactive voice response, so automated surveys. We send surveys on call center through our call center. So like human enumerators, like calling you and like, collecting information. We do communication campaigns, both through voice calls or SMS. We do a lot of remote learning packages, which is lessons like digital, audio lessons, kind of like cut up into a couple of weeks based on a curriculum that we design with our partners. And then it's deployed with a pre and post kind of survey question on that lesson. The lessons are like 3 to 5 minutes long, and participants can choose to take the lessons at their convenience. We also have, like you were saying, like a market access platform. One of our flagship products, though, is a platform that we call in-house the 321 platform. 321 started off in Ghana back in 2013, and we have 321 in 21 of the 40 countries where we're present. So what 321 is, it's basically a national interactive voice response platform. We partner with the mobile network operator in country. I'll give you the specific case of Nepal. In Nepal, we have partnered with Nepal Telecom, who has 54% of the market share. So our 321 platform in Nepal is available to 24 million people. So what these people have access to is through their mobile phones. They have to have the Nepal Telecom SIM card. They have free access to the daily news, the weather, crop calendars, like early warning messages, and games like audio games, stories, radio shows, and I think there's like 750 pieces of like other audio content on various like social topics, like, you know, Jesse, WASH, DRR, agriculture, foreign labor migration, et cetera, et cetera. And we started this in Nepal in 2019. We launched the 321 platform in Nepal in 2019. And we had, I think, a startup number of maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people calling in per month. Now we have organically around like 800,000 people calling in per month. And this is, again, free access to them. When I go to the field now, you know, people are like, oh, we listen to the news on 321. They don't necessarily know Viamo runs the platform because we don't brand it. We don't brand any partner actually or their names. We want to keep it branding agnostic. And it's also to be mindful of the airtime that our MNO partner provides to us. So it's basically just the content. And so the access to information, and this is, again, you don't need a smartphone, you just need to have dial-out capacity. So you can even use those, like, you know, brick feature phones to access the platform. And so this has been a huge tool, or, you know, kind of a huge tool for people to access information at their own, you know, on demand, basically. In Uganda, Kenya, Burkina Faso, we have the same platform, and we have a lot of farmers call in to get access to access information on crops, seasonal crops, like, you know, the weather, for example. So there's a bunch of case studies that, you know, our website also has, but I can also pull it from our internal stories to share for those who are interested. I just mentioned those countries because I also saw in the chat that some of you were from there or based there. But it's really proven to be something that has allowed our communities, wherever we are located, to like just have better and easier access to information, right? And this is free of service to them. Free of cost to them. We are expanding 321, hopefully over the next couple of months. By the end of 2022, we should have 321 in a couple more other countries, like we're in that process right now. But as of today, it's in 21 different countries. And what usually happens is the mobile network operator, they contribute, they donate airtime to us so that we can then provide all of that content for free to the end user. Just in 2021, globally, we had all of our MNO partners contribute $175 million worth of airtime, so free minutes to us. And so as we grow, our intention really is for kind of like 321 to be a service for the people. And Viamo invests in it largely to make sure that, you know, content is regularly updated, it's relevant, it's fresh, and it's also something that people can access directly. So there have been questions around whether we would make this, you know, an online service, like whether we'd make an app around this. But for the moment, we want to stick to the basics. We want to stick to low tech. We want to stick to offline, and we want to stick to the devices and the skill set that we know people, especially in the hard to reach communities that we work in, that they have already there.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's.
Go ahead.
Thank you. No, I was just going to thank you for that, because I wanted to kind of get a sense of like the scale you can have. And I was going to ask about the app thing, because I'm imagining between 2019 and now, like, is smartphone usage going up, and are you looking at like WhatsApp and some of these other tools? But that's a question for another time. Gail, I know you had a.
So I'll answer that quickly. So just to let you know, so we do have like, you know, smartphone applications as well. We're not just like, you know, feature phone based, but at the end of the day, what really matters is when you kind of like hone in on a specific community in a specific country, you really look at, okay, what are the devices that are available and what is the skill set that the communities have, right? And we want to kind of elevate digital enablement and not put pressure on them. And in terms of like their own investments as well, like, you know, while we'll see a lot of people invest in mobile credit, they might not always invest in data packages themselves, like independently. And also internet data, sometimes the connectivity is just very weak. Whereas like, you know, cell phone connectivity is probably better. So we have, you know, a lot of smartphone applications as well, but for the most part, our low tech, more feature phone applications have been better and widely used. So, but we do have a WhatsApp bot, we have a Messenger bot, like, you know, so there's a bunch of, you know, smartphone applications that we implement as well around the world. Sorry, Gail. Yes.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I love it. I'm learning so much, and I didn't mean to interrupt. And
Oh, not at all.
you know, we have some, I think Dina is in Haiti and
Okay.
Bienvenue is in DRC, I think. And then Jimmy already wrote that he's in Uganda, and I think he's serving a community that's in rural Uganda. And so in terms of like, let's say DRC, and, you know, we have people, I know people in our network who are working with youth and who are working with refugees, who are working with displaced, you know, people, and you know, there's crisis in Haiti, of course. And so do you have programming ideas, or do you have things in place for, let's say, working with those who are 18 and under, or those who are you know, in a community like a refugee and their parents aren't around, you know, to get them? Is that a different kind of approach? And how does what you're doing, which is awesome, work for those marginalized groups as well?
Sure. No. So we have country offices in both of the 3 countries that you mentioned. So I'm happy to put your team in touch with our country directors there. For those who are 18 and under, we just follow, like, you know, global child protection protocol, which is really to make sure, if not their parents, then who is the adult or the guardian responsible for them? So if, let's say, hypothetically, if they're staying in an IDP camp, like, it's the camp supervisor. If it's like a shelter home, then it's a shelter supervisor, right? So what is the best way to engage young people under 18, minors specifically, in any of the content that we produce? So what is the best way to get them involved in the design of the content? Or what is the best way to deploy the content to them? So we have in DRC, we started what we call listeners clubs, where we had like a peer facilitator go into a community with young that had children and more marginalized communities. And so they would kind of dial into 321, put it on speakerphone. So there was kind of like a communal listening event. And they would then facilitate
That's
conversations
cool.
around that. Yeah, so then facilitate conversations around that. The piece, we have a bunch of listening clubs in listeners clubs in DRC. And one of the main things was also around, like, you know, a lot of these young people don't necessarily directly have their own access to these devices, right? So it might be a centralized device or in a household or something like that, and usually they might not be the ones who are able to, like, you know, choose what or how to access content on it. So we started that. I know in a lot of other fragile contexts, similar programming has happened, and it's really around like designing the solution with the partners, with community leaders involved, and making sure that the minors have a say, but it's always with the consent and the presence of adults that are responsible for them.
That sounds great. That sounds great. So fascinating. I want to just learn more and more. And I apologize. My mom came into the room and she was asking for something. So I was like, I apologize for that disruption.
No problem.
That's nice, right?
No problem at all.
Yeah. I guess we have a few minutes left. Does anyone want to ask a question? Because I know I'm dominating this conversation here. Anyone else think of something?
I think I saw a question from Dina. If you wanted to come off mute and read your question out,
there
or we can read it out as well. But the question was, what advice would you give to a social entrepreneur who is looking for partnership connection for their venture? Also, some of the big organizations are looking for certification from your authority that you are unable to provide now, or you are in the process. How would you deal with that situation? I imagine with certification, that's also related to like registration information, which oftentimes folks aren't registered as well. So if you have some
Right.
advice on those two.
Right. So if you're not registered, what I would maybe say is, could you perhaps team up with a registered entity that has similar ethics or program intentions that you do? Like, they could be a partner, they could prime the application or the proposal, because for transparency in terms of where funding goes, a lot of these big donors, they do require registration to make sure that their funds are being distributed to legitimate individuals and entities. And as frustrating as that is, that's unfortunately just a bureaucratic hurdle that we have to surpass, because at the end of the day, they also have their government audits, because this is at the end of the day taxpayers' money, right? So I understand that they have to be accountable to their own governments as well, or their own funders. So is there a way to do like a NDA with a partner or a group that is already registered, that you share similar ethics with, that you share a partnership based on trust with, and is that a way to go? If you're in the process of registering, I would say get that sorted and then apply independently, depending on how confident you feel about leading a proposal, whether you need other partners involved or not, but just get that sorted. Because there will always be opportunities, right? And the first part of your question was around who are looking for partnering connections. Do you mean partnering connections in terms of access to funding? It would be great if you could just clarify so I could maybe be more specific in my response. Yes, okay. I would say just, sign up to like, various websites. Like off the top of my head, I can think of like Relief Web. LinkedIn also has a bunch of opportunities that are consistently being shared. Join Facebook groups, social groups that again share your work ethics, share similar intentions around the sectoral work you want to do. Just be out there on social media, on like these various forums where there are either message boards or groups that you can kind of like have more access to. Try and join even some of the in-person like clubs or groups, like is there like a YMCA or like a youth group kind of group in your neighborhood, in your community? Is there, let's say, a donor that is hosting like a meet or greet, or even like a social entrepreneurs talk or evening or event? Are there international NGOs that are kind of like hosting like just kind of brainstorming sessions? So one of the things would also be to kind of like prepare yourself with at least a microsite, a website, or even like a one-pager of like what it is that you want to do. Like, so when you are seeking out these partnerships, you're ready with either a hard copy or like a link to then navigate these folks to like, what it is that you want to do. So you have obviously your elevator pitches, I'm sure, but beyond that, what's the next step? What's the hook, right? Like, how do you want to get them interested in a conversation? And always make sure to kind of then try and schedule like a face-to-face, like a one-on-one meeting, so you can tell them more about what you're doing, what you've done, and what you intend to do. And like, try and kind of like fish around for any opportunities for partnership or resource allocation. And resources could be more, if they can be financial, but they could also mean like sweat equity from the partners, right? So it doesn't necessarily always have to be like they fund you, but they could maybe mentor you, or maybe they could like even give you just pure feedback or critical feedback on your idea. So I just say like, yeah, get around and meet people. That's the best way to establish yourself. And also even if you don't have a logo or have yourself registered, like, create a business card. Create a business card, have something to hand out so that they remember you, and then try and at least get them to give you something so that you can then follow up immediately over email or whatever social media platform that they're comfortable doing so on. Was there another question as well? Yeah.
There was a question. I wanted to be mindful of your time. I know we're just about
No, it's
a minute,
fine.
so okay.
No, I'm happy to stay on if you guys are good for it.
Yeah, maybe we can take a
Sure.
couple of minutes and answer this question. That would be super helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
So the question was, Jimmy, did you want to ask?
I like this question. So this is a really interesting question. It's really it's a difficult question for me. I smile because I reflect back at the fact that I had no work-life balance. I'm laughing now in hindsight. But like it's also this, right? Like, I mean, I started doing this in my 20s. I'm well into my 40s now, and if I knew what I know now, I would really be mindful of guarding my own space, of guarding my own time. But back then it was just like, all right, like, I'm gonna go save the world. Not literally, but you know what I mean. And it was really that energy and that kind of like wholeheartedness that I jumped in with, which was great. But at the end of the day, I did realize a couple of years ago that I got burnt out, and the pandemic weirdly allowed me to slow down. Up to the pandemic, I was traveling like a good 8-9 months a year. Yeah, and it was as exciting and thrilling as it was in terms of like, meeting people, learning stories, and doing good work. 2020 was the first time that I kind of was in the same place for more than like a couple of months, and it allowed me to slow down and like really reevaluate what I wanted for me and my daughter. Yeah, so I think early on, definitely try and create your space. Definitely try and make sure that you don't give yourself, or you don't put yourself on a guilt trip for not working. Not working is good sometimes, and you need to be able to fill your own cup, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And sometimes we don't realize that our cups are bone dry. And I think that is a lesson that I've learned with age and time, and I wish I knew that in my 20s. And I'm guessing all of you are around that age range. So please, make time for yourselves in the evenings with your families, with your loved ones. Switch off screens. I'm like looking at all of my screens on my table right now. Switch off of screens, and don't feel guilty about always being switched on as a person, but on your various platforms as well. So it's a lesson you learn, I think, with practice, and it's just a boundary that you have to create for yourself, because only you can do that in terms of like, having that first relationship with yourself and really prioritizing yourself as you would your child or your partner or another loved one that you would want to make time for. Just make time for yourself.
Great answer. And I really enjoy the smile and the delight that you bring to the reflection, right? Versus the eye roll or the, because it does also mean to take us, be kind to ourselves all the time.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
And for all of those who came today, I just want to encourage your sense of fresh eyedness, right? That beginner's mind, that sense of, I'm just going to, be there today, and I don't have to have an agenda. I can just listen, and I can take things in. That's a little bit of self-care as well, because sometimes when we're running a business, we have our to-do list of this letter and this metric, and then I got to talk to this person. And sometimes, especially in this world of digital, distances, I think it's nice to just hang out and talk. And I'm really grateful for that approach that you bring, right? That very sort of, I want to say intimate, but it's also very professional at the same time, if that makes sense. So thank you so much. And I hope that we can continue to talk some more. And continue to learn from you.
Yeah,
No,
I
and
think
thank you. Yeah.
No, yeah, and I think there's a ton of, I think, thought that we're gonna be unpacking in the coming weeks. So really appreciate you for leaving us with some like really insightful gems, whether it comes from like the concept around like innovation and what that means, or whether it comes to like this idea of like working within institutions and really kind of building that entrepreneurship mindset, which I think is an interesting one to think about, and some of this kind of advice that you've shared with us. I know that like my page is like filled with like really interesting ideas that I hope to like unpack as well, and I'm sure we'll all be doing that as a community. But I just want to thank you for your time, and apologies for taking 5 more minutes of that
No problem.
valuable morning. I hope I hope this is day off. I don't know if you're able to take some time off, but it is hopefully a restful birthday for you. And thank you once again for just bringing all of your wisdom and insights to this community.
Happy birthday. I hope it's filled with
Thank you.
yumminess and delights. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you so much. And this has been, I was telling Avi, is like, it's my birthday. Normally I hide, but sure, I'll do this because I guess this is a sign that I have to like, gain from you as much as you're allowing me to share your space, right? One of the things I'll leave you maybe with is, and I was telling Gail and Avi this, I think before you guys joined in, is as you go along, try and speak to younger people, try and speak to people who are not in your sector, not in your workspace. When I used to work at the Innovation Lab back in the day, my daughter's 10 now. She was 5, 6 when I first started. I used to bring her in and I used to get our teams to do pitches to her. And my instructions were always that if you can't explain your idea to a 5-year-old, then it's not going to make sense to anyone, right? I guess it's the flip side of that whole thing when people are like, oh, if you can't explain your idea to a 98-year-old Swedish grandmother, then, but like, I didn't have a 98-year-old Swedish grandmother. I just had a 5-year-old who was really feisty. And so she would always ask questions because she was 5, and so I would say always get people to ask you questions around your ideas. I know there's a question that we probably don't have time for right now, but ask people in your ecosystem, like maybe younger cousins or younger friends or younger siblings, the same question, just try and see things from other people's perspectives, because as we're building these ideas, sometimes we tend to box ourselves and sometimes we have like blinders on, right? And then we don't see beyond our kind of like target. So have young mentors. I would say like having a younger mentor or somebody professional to speak to has been a huge change maker for me. And it's allowed me to kind of get myself into like, not a very comfortable space at first, because it's a mind shift change, but ultimately you're able to like then relax your shoulders and also be like curious about what you're doing, what you're contributing towards. So always put yourself in a position of discomfort, and only then will you succeed.
Love that. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for once again for making time. So much gratitude from all of us, and hope you have a fantastic trip in the US and get some rest today. Thank you so much, Ira.
Thank you so much. Again. Great.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Jimmy.
Awesome. Bye, everyone. Talk to y'all soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.